Hi guys, and welcome to the High Man podcast. Today is Wednesday, the 23rd of November. Currently, is the 13th episode, I think. Hello from me and Pete. Good to be back. We missed a week last week, unfortunately. We were kind of had busy schedules, so we weren't able to align a time where we could get one out. But back on it this week. But yeah, how are we doing, Pete?
Yeah, not too bad. You cut out a little bit there in the intro, but it was only for like 5 seconds. So let's just keep rolling. But yeah, no, I'm doing all right. Good to be back on the podcast as always.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Like I said, we missed a week last week, unfortunately. But going forward, I don't think that should be a problem. I've reduced my hours at my job, so I should be free more throughout the week, so I can work around you a bit more, and we can get one done more consistently then.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, well, today we haven't really got a plan of what we want to talk about. We thought we'd kind of just go off on a whim, maybe talk about the World Cup as it's quite relevant right now, discuss some other things, maybe like Twitter and how Elon Musk is buying it and kind of, in some opinions, destroying it and other opinions liberating it. But yeah, we'll kind of just let the conversation go where it needs to go, have a bit of fun, I guess, and get the ball rolling straight away, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, well, I guess topical at the moment is the Qatar World Cup. So I don't know if it's the first time ever that it's been done in November/December, or if it's always been done in the summer in the past. But for me, anyway, it just doesn't really feel like it's the World Cup because it just to me the World Cup's just meant to be beer gardens and sun and people off uni and stuff. But this year it's a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, it really doesn't feel like it's the World Cup time. Yeah, so we can talk a bit about it being in Qatar, and obviously there's a lot of controversy about the Qatar situation in terms of certain things not being allowed, like the armbands, like the pride armbands or whatever it is, for the captains. They're not allowed to wear them. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I don't know, it's a difficult one. In today's day and age, you kind of would expect that most people around the world are tolerant of other people's ways of living and beliefs. So you could you could apply that to Qatar, and you could argue Qatar needs to kind of mature a little bit and just accept that other people have different ways of living and let people do that. But then you could flip it and also say, the world, you could say it to the world, the world should be able to tolerate Qatar's viewpoints on LGBTQ plus and let Qatar do its own thing. And if Qatar doesn't want to have that in its country, it's not really necessary for the world to impose it on them. So it kind of goes both ways. So it's a bit of a blurry line in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And you say that kind of you'd expect the whole world to be more tolerant, but I think that's, I wonder how prevalent that is actually throughout the whole world, or whether that's really just kind of a Western phenomenon. Like our places like Qatar, where they don't allow this thing, they're probably more common than you'd think, based on the way our lives are, the culture that we live in. So yeah, I do think it's, I'm obviously in favor of people's freedom to express themselves how they want to. I think as an individual, people should be able to do what they want as long as they're not harming other people. However, the Qatari rules kind of come from Islam, and you kind of need to respect there's an argument that you should respect their religion, and that as you think you should respect other people's decisions to identify as certain ways, or to have a certain sexuality, you should also respect people's ability to have opinions on these things, which which they don't think it's good, but it's hard for both of those things to exist at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I was gonna say it could come down to like, is it individual freedom, the like collective freedom? Because religions, in my mind, only like exist as a collective of individuals. I don't know. I'm quite secular. I just think religions shouldn't really necessarily be part of the state. So I think individual freedom is more important. But it's difficult. It's like religion is so embedded in so many different cultures around the world, on like a societal level and on an individual level. But I just think there's so much like danger of like people getting coerced into these belief systems that aren't necessarily what they want to believe. It's just because the religion's told them to.
Yeah, and it does just seem fucked up that people can't live their lives the way that their own sort of being is aligned to, and that they'd get punished severely for something that they might not necessarily be able to control. But it's
I mean, like, what would you say to? Sorry, like, what would you say to like if like there was agreement? The agreement was that Qatar held the World Cup, but there was like a condition that they like let people be gay freely and like express themselves and their sexuality in a free way. Like if Qatar wanted to hold the World Cup that bad, FIFA could have like argued these conditions into the contract. Do you think that would have been a good thing overall, or like maybe like a bad thing?
Well, I personally believe it would be a good thing because I believe in the individual freedom and kind of things like libertarianism type thing. People should be able to do, like I said, do what they want if it's not harming other people. So I personally think, yeah, that would have been a good thing because it more so aligns with my values. But I guess the more interesting question, rather than just what I believe, is should you be able to influence another culture's? Should it have been used as like a point of leverage to try and change a different culture's belief system and their rules that they believe to be true and sacred? I don't know. Have you got thoughts on that?
Like, I agree with you, and I think like the individual freedom should be prioritized. But if you're going to try and like force Qatar or like coerce them into these like libertarian ideas which they don't subscribe to at all, like I feel like you're going to kind of not radicalize them, but like create more extreme versions of their own ideas. It's like kind of what we said in the past. Like you can't make someone what's the word? How do I describe it? Like you can't force someone to learn something and better themselves in different ways. But it has to be voluntary for it to be like effective. And I feel like the opposite of that is true. Like if you do try and force someone into something, it can kind of almost have more negative consequences and force people the other way more so. So I feel like it would have been, I don't know, I feel like it would have been kind of bad if like FIFA demanded that Qatar held up some Western ideas and philosophies rather than their own traditional values.
Yeah.
Although I just think like just wrong the way they've done it. Well, I just don't. Well, yeah.
Well, I think the whole thing, like even it being in Qatar, it's ridiculous. It's not a footballing nation, and it's quite clearly just a money grab for FIFA. And FIFA are a notoriously corrupt organization. So this is just, it's what you'd expect. But they have no real incentive to push a social agenda. They're just out to make money. So yeah, I don't think that wouldn't be realistic for FIFA to have tried to use it to push certain things. onto Qatar changes in rules, because they don't give a shit about them. They're just in it for money, and it's not an issue to them.
Yeah. Well, you said like you think FIFA are just maybe not necessarily ethical and in it for the money. Do you think this is one of like the negative consequences of capitalism?
Absolutely. The when there's I am a fan of capitalism. I think it works the best out of the systems that we've seen being played out. A capitalist democracy society. I think that setup works best. However, this is absolutely the problem with capitalism, that financial gain and greed can be pursued more than anything, and that will sometimes, and has many times, and is currently across the world, like being used a lot. Like capitalism is a means of people making money, and there are greedy people who will do unethical things to pursue that. So yeah, it is a negative side of capitalism.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Like you'd hope that all these companies around the world would have leaders that want to practice like corporate social responsibility. But like you said, people will just kind of look to the profits as the bottom line and disregard everything else if it's going to sacrifice some sort of profitability. But I mean, like nowadays, you got a lot of companies are. Well, I don't know if it's a lot or not, what the percentages are, but emerging nowadays are these companies where they're set up with the purpose and like mission of being socially responsible. Like they still want to make money, and they still do make money and have like great returns, but they do it in like an ethical way, which is good. And like you'd hope over time, as capitalism like progresses more and more, and like the access to creating businesses is extended to people throughout the world, I feel like that trajectory will just grow and grow. Like more and more of the businesses in the world will hopefully be like socially driven.
Yeah, you'd hope so. And perhaps there's a responsibility that needs to be taken by certain organizations to push things in that direction. You can argue how much responsibility they should take on themselves versus whether they should just follow rules and regulations and maximize profit within that. Like there's a whole ethical debate over how to ethically make money, how much responsibility the company takes for its actions, even if they are legal. But I just thought, actually, so I think the issue with, you say the issue that is capitalism an issue because it breeds this kind of unethical people searching for their own gain in unethical ways. But I think that problem goes far deeper than capitalism, and any place where people can access power, there will be people, regardless of the system. To think a communist system would be any better at would encourage people to act in an ethical way any more than a capitalist system does, I don't think is true, because people still pursue power. And the thing about the capitalist system is that, yes, people can make money, and they can do it for the sake of greed, and and they can do it for the sake of power, but they do that in an honest way. Whereas this is something Jordan Peterson's commented about capitalism, that capitalism encourages the vice, so to speak, of greed, but that's not the worst vice there is. I use the word vice as an opposite to virtue. Like the worst vice there is would be deception, and in a system where there's no means of acquiring power through honest ways, then deception will be, will occur in order to access that power.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, would you say that like capitalism and communism will inevitably have abuses of power because that's the nature of power, whereas maybe capitalism offers the opportunity to an individual to create their own power, if that makes sense? Like, they can create their own business and they can do these things to empower themselves, whereas communism, you're kind of subject to what the state tells you to do and like how they enforce it.
Yeah, I feel
So
like
you've got
capitalism gives people individual opportunities more. Sorry, I cut you off there.
no. So, oh yeah, I was basically just gonna say that like capitalism offers you freedom, whereas like communism restricts it completely. Not completely, but to a very large extent, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, the thing Jordan Peterson said about it was in a negotiation with someone, it'd be with someone whose primary thing is greed. You can negotiate with that person because they'll be honest about what they want, and yeah, they might want to take slightly more than they deserve, but you can negotiate with that person. You can come up with an agreement, and you can mutually benefit from that. Even if the fundamental drive is greed, there can be a mutual benefit there. Whereas when you're dealing with deception, there's no ability to negotiate towards a mutual goal or a mutual benefit between the two of you, because any agreement you make it's not, it won't stand. So
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting to be fair. I mean, but then what about when you get into the situation of two massive corporations in a capitalist society come together to form an agreement, and both of their drivers agreed, and both of them win by taking from the consumer or like exploiting the consumer, the worker. But how do you kind of solve something like that?
yeah, that's
I guess where like some of the arguments for communism would come in, because there is situations where these big corporations have all this power and they just do exploit workers and things like that. But that is, I don't know if when I say saying that now, it makes me think about the face value of it. Like, you could argue Amazon, this huge corporation, has had so many like news reports about workers who have terrible working conditions, aren't getting paid that much. But if you really dive into it, like, Amazon's providing thousands of people with jobs, creating all this other wealth for other areas around the world. Not that it's necessarily for the individuals who have terrible working conditions to be sacrificed, but like, is the working conditions like just about good enough that we can like sacrifice their discomfort for the greater good of creating like this wealth for the rest of the world?
yeah, it's a good question, because I think what we've seen with capitalism is, particularly back when people like Marx were making arguments, a large thing was labor, about how the owners of factories, for example, would basically have complete power, and they'd abuse it over the people who worked for them, and they pay them a minimum amount. And it was argued that labor wasn't fair. But what we've seen in the last couple 100 years is a massive increase in the quality of life of the average person due to capitalism. So it's hard to justify for people to suffer in a situation where maybe they don't really have a way out. It's difficult to justify that, but perhaps I'm not saying you can, but it's possible that someone could justify it based on the tide rising everyone up, because the quality of life, like for example, access to healthcare of people now compared to people 100 years ago, the richest people 100 years ago wouldn't get the healthcare that the poorest person in the UK will get now. And obviously that varies between different countries, but it does. It's an interesting debate.
Yeah, yeah, truly. I mean, nowadays you could argue we aren't really living in an economy that is truly capitalist. It's almost like a bit of a hybrid. Like, we live in a capitalist society, on the face of it, but we have all these policies and regulations that like protect workers, enforce minimum wages, and like things like that. And it's kind of difficult in my mind to argue against capitalism sometimes, and also against communism, because you could argue that we've not seen a true form of communism, because the Soviet Union was like was very corrupt, and it wasn't kind of practicing a true form of it. And you could argue that capitalism nowadays isn't really a true form that's being practiced. So like it's kind of hard for me sometimes to know which one's better. I'd always sway to capitalism though, but I know there's a lot of people out there that would argue for communism if it's done correctly, as they say.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Me personally, the way I see it, I don't think. Well, okay. So to your original point, like, yeah, society now it integrates socialist elements into the capitalist structure. So there's welfare, and in the UK you have public healthcare. A lot of countries you have free public education. Free education, public education. Is public education, is that the right word for it? Yeah. Free, like free education. Like these things are socialist elements run by the state, funded through tax. However, taken to the extreme, I think the communist ideals, the communist utopia that is proposed, I think goes against human nature in a fundamental way, where it could never work. The idealized assumptions that go into that, I just don't think are accurate. Whereas you can argue, I mean, we can see how capitalism works with human nature, and a part of human nature is greed. But we've seen how, even driven by greeds, you can argue that the overall wealth that is brought to everyone, it kind of works in practice. Whereas I just think communism just does not work with human nature, and I can get into the details of why I think that, but yeah, obviously you want socialist elements, but ultimately I think capitalism as a fundamental system is more aligned with human nature, and it's proven to work. You can argue to what degree like it doesn't work. Some people would argue it doesn't work, but we have fucking electricity, we have internet, we have water that we can drink out of taps. Like, these are things we don't think about, and yeah, that I don't think those things are as guaranteed as we think.
Yeah, like you saying, someone could argue to what degree is capitalism that good, but like if you look into that question a bit more, you could say to what degree is capitalism the best version of what we've got, and I think there's a like resounding yes to that answer, to that question. Sorry, like even if it's not amazing, it's probably the best thing that we've got, and it's proved itself, like you were saying. Yeah, it's very easy to get the menial things like mate, like literally just having Wi-Fi, like fucking hell. Like my Wi-Fi in my house has been a bit dodgy today, and it's like really annoying. But then I was just like, well, like so many people around the world don't even have a fucking computer or electronic device in their house, and all of us just fucking take it for granted.
Yeah, it comes back to I'm sorry.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, I've brought up a few times on the podcast before how people talk about society versus nature, like culture versus nature, and symbolically you have the tyrannical element of culture, and you also have the wise king part of culture, and you have the divine part of nature, and you have the chaotic, destructive part of nature. And it's important to have a balanced view of those things, to understand that in culture there is tyranny, and I don't want to deny that there is evil, but there's also, you know, everything we have is because of culture. and the same for nature. Like, obviously there's a divine, beautiful part of nature and a freedom associated with that, but the chaos and destruction of pure just left untapped isn't, you know, there's both sides to it, really.
Yeah, I hear that. Going back to like what you're saying about human nature, I know we probably aren't very well read in this area, but like obviously evolution of a species takes like millennia. Do you think human nature like will ever change from a point? Right, will ever change from a point of aligning with capitalist philosophies to maybe going towards like communist philosophies, where instead of looking for individual freedom, we naturally have this like tendency to, as human nature evolves, we naturally have the tendency to work for others, even if we don't necessarily get what we worked for. Does that make sense?
I don't think human nature will ever change until the extinction of the species. And I think it's because it's not even human nature. I think it's just fundamental, maybe even kind of a fundamental thing about life. So I'll get into the like a specific thing that I think demonstrates a point. So the point about human nature is people strive for rewards. This is, you know, this is absolutely known. This is how anything works. It works like this on the psychological level, on the neurological level. People work towards rewards, and they gain pleasure and fulfillment through attaining those rewards. We're hardwired to be motivated to take action to attain things, and that's the opportunity that capitalism provides, whereas communism completely denies that part of human nature. And the fact is, people won't work if there's no incentive to. And maybe a society could be, I think a society would have to be so tyrannical to force that out of people. But I just don't think, even if they were able to force everyone to work like that, there wouldn't be nearly the level of creative achievement and production and innovation that there could ever be in a capitalist society.
Yeah. No, I hear that. What about like the idea that eventually, as technology advances and AI becomes like just almost more advanced than the human mind and computers? There's a guy called Naval Ravikant. He kind of loves the idea of, well, I think it was him, I might get it wrong, but he loves the idea of technology getting to a point where it meets all of our necessities and all of our daily needs are provided for by like robots almost. And with that, humans wouldn't have to work. And he thinks that if humans wouldn't have to work, we would still be happy as creatures because we'd only have time to do creative endeavors. Like if none of us had to work, everyone in the world could choose what they want to do and just pursue what they enjoyed.
Yeah.
Like, do you think like that's not a communist idea, but like it's not a capitalist society in my opinion? Like it's a little bit of a hybrid between the both. Do you think that would be something that would work?
Yeah, I do like that Naval Ravikant dude. That but that particular point, like it does sound like a very Marxist type view of things, an idealistic type view of things, where if people were to not have to work, then they would take that time to pursue creative endeavors. But this is why Nietzsche disagreed so fundamentally with Marxism, and he thought it was an absolutely ridiculous philosophy. And it comes to the idea of the last man and the higher man. So the idea that people, given freedom, would default to pursuing creative things. That's Nietzsche didn't think, and I don't think, and I think anyone who really thinks about it probably agree that people's default is it. People's default when there's no struggle, when there's no ultimate aim, when there's no goal provided, there's no real clear goal for them to work towards. People default to consumption. People default to pursuing pleasure. People will, if people didn't have to work, you know, some minority of people, I'm sure, would make the best use of that time. But I think with no real incentive to do things, people default to consumption. Yeah, what do you think about that?
If you, I think you're right, but I think there's still a small chance that like you could try and teach people like the benefit. Well, like you explain that risk to people, and then you teach them like the benefit of like truly working hard and trying to become a master in their creative endeavor. Like if you love painting, if you actually like work it as like a job, then I think you'll still find your life fulfilling, and it won't necessarily result to just consumerism and pleasure. But like we said before, it's kind of hard to force people to do these difficult tasks. It needs to be a voluntary acceptance of it and pursuit of it. But I don't know. I feel like maybe we get to a point of like that movie Wall-E, where everyone's just floating around on these chairs, just super overweight, not actually enjoying life, just fucking living every day for the next little pleasure. Brain dead.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying though. If people were taught the value of, because obviously the way of gaining meaning and fulfillment is by you know, working towards things,
Choosing your struggle.
yeah, I was about to say there's an issue there that the suffering is essential. Like there has to be a level of sacrifice, there has to be a level of suffering, and I don't know if people will do that if they don't have a direct incentive to. But maybe more than people being directly taught, I think it'd be a cultural shift that would happen if we had a strong culture that promoted almost this like how tribes have initiations things for their young people, that they make their young people go through a certain level of challenge, and it's like a rites of passage. If we had a strong culture which encouraged that sort of thing, then perhaps it would be possible. But you know, whether that's possible on a large scale, I don't know, because this is like
what would you do with the people who don't?
Sorry,
Like the people that can't complete the rites of passage. How do you deal with them? Do you just kill them, throw them in a bin, or like make them work till the day they die, like in a tyrannical way?
yeah, it's difficult because
Or do you try and provide? Sorry.
it comes back to what the incentive is, and I guess if there's no incentive, then it's difficult.
Yeah. It still blows my mind like how the human population is just in every single part of the world. Like I'm personally fascinated by animals that like have survived these terrible conditions throughout history. Like crocodiles just amaze me how they've kind of went through like the ice age, like the meteor coming down, taking out most of the dinosaur life. But then I read somewhere or I heard somewhere the other day like the most adaptable animal could be argued to be humans. Like we live in every single condition in the world, and although you could argue it's not natural adaptation because we build these resources to help us deal with the conditions, like that is still natural because we're just doing what an animal would do. And like humans just fucking, oh mate, we're crazy.
We're crazy. It is crazy when you stop and think about it. Obviously, it's a bit like you don't think about this because it's like your life is the way it is. But to go outside and all these roads around us have been paved by people, all these houses have been built brick by brick by people. The institutions that we're involved in have been created from the ground up of people, and it's quite incredible to think the scale of impacts that humans have been able to have. And yeah, I think humans absolutely are the most adaptable animal. I don't think that's deniable in any way. Maybe you want to say, oh, it's cheating, but I mean, who's making the rules, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to like know to what extent would you extend the definition of like natural, because like you know, like in foods you've got like natural organic foods, and then you've got processed foods. Like the processed foods, you could argue are still natural because we've been made by humans, which are natural. But where would you draw the line? That's where something's natural and what natural. Like everyone always argues, "Oh, having your phone on you 24/7 is just not natural." Like we never used to do that. But is it kind of natural because we're just exploiting the resources that we have available to us?
Yeah, that's an interesting debate there. Is it natural? I guess we are, in the way we're biological creatures, and everything that's come about hasn't magically appeared. Like the word artificial, I mean, it comes from some, like anything, even if it's artificial, comes from somewhere. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
but
Sorry, go on. I still think there is some benefit to try and find what natural is. Like in my opinion, if you try and live a bit more closely to how we used to live a few hundred years ago, where you kind of don't use electronics in the evening, or you try and get out all day and like expose yourself to the sunlight, that is more natural in my mind. And with that definition, like you're going to be a bit more healthier and you're going to feel better about yourself. So there is I think there's definitely like a cost, not cost, but like, there's definitely like some benefits to going natural, if you know what I mean.
yeah, I think,
but it's hard to define it.
It's hard to exactly define it, but I guess it's contextual, isn't it? To live in a more natural way, as in to live in a way which is more in touch with the way we've evolved, and that is more matches up with our biology, and therefore will more match up with it. Will have positive effects on our well-being. To live in a natural way like that, yeah, definitely is a positive thing.
Yeah, but then how far back do you extend that? Do you try and go back to when we first became Homo sapiens and we were just living by campfire, foraging every single day?
Yeah, it'd seem impractical to do that because you're not leveraging the powers that we currently have through technology, which technology isn't natural per se, but absolutely opens up an insane amount of potential for us, as it does open up potential for negative effects.
Yeah, I think it was yesterday, I saw that I think it was successfully done. It might have been the University of Philadelphia's like Children's Hospital or something. They successfully grew a lamb in an artificial womb.
Oh yeah, my housemate was telling me about that today.
I was just like, at what point are we going to start doing this for humans? I'm like, are they really human? Because they're not necessarily natural, but they are. And it's just it's going to be a very blurry line when it comes to human rights and stuff. I mean, you could even argue that when it comes to artificial intelligence, like when you get a self-learning, autonomous consciousness that's been made from software, they are a conscious being, and they might not necessarily have like physical feelings. They might have senses and stuff, but would they be able to feel pain? Is that what makes something natural?
I mean, what is pain? I mean, I've been thinking about this recently, and as humans, as animals and humans, we're basically just biological robots. I don't like at a fundamental level. We don't know where consciousness comes from. Whether it's whether you need to have like the animal cell structure, for example, and whether you like creating neural networks with artificial intelligence, whether that would have the capacity to create the same consciousness that humans have. But you look at it and you think, well, what do humans have? We have sensors, we have sight, we can hear things. These are just various ways of interpreting stimulus from the external world. Like, what's to say a robot with sensors doesn't feel them? You know, it's weird. It's how do you know though? Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, there's some people that have like conditions where they don't feel pain, like all their receptors so like shut off for some reason, and they don't feel pain. We damage in their skin. So I like that idea. Like, we are biological robots. That's quite a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, but that just, if anything, that just makes it even more profound and crazy how we do have consciousness. Like, it's such an anomaly, and we all experience it, and we can sit here all day and talk about how we can be reduced to this deterministic like set of atoms, but the like divinity of consciousness is just, it baffles when I think about it. It baffles me every time, thinking like, it's hard to wrap my head around how consciousness can exist, how this personal experience of the world can exist in a deterministic type of thing. But I think it does work like that. I feel like at the deepest level, it is deterministic. There's nothing that exists outside the physical laws, but you know, we're still conscious, and it's just like, fuck, man, it's crazy.
Yeah. But if nothing exists outside of the physical laws, would that assume or presume that consciousness is physical almost?
Yeah,
or it has to have some sort of physicality?
well, I do think, I mean, there's obviously, it seems it's quite clear there's some relationship between brain size and level of consciousness. But then, I mean, there's talks over whether, for example, like trees are conscious, but that'll be in a completely different way because they don't have the same nervous system that animals do. So
No.
it's a mad one. I don't know. I do think consciousness is, it kind of has to ultimately be a physical thing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But perhaps I'm
Do you think that could
close-minded in a way? But
well, you never know. It could be. Do you think like, if we were able to identify consciousness and like measure it, do you think that would kind of be the pinnacle of human discoveries?
it'd certainly be up there. Yeah.
But then, like, if we think that's the pinnacle, well, if I thought that was the pinnacle of human discoveries, maybe we won't discover how consciousness is formed or how to measure it. But if we create AI that is like autonomous and conscious, then we would have kind of discovered it by creating it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
It comes.
And
yeah. The trouble is that you can't. It's. I don't know if it's. I don't know. I'm sure one day there'll be a way figured out to do so, but I don't know. I don't see how it's possible to tell if something is conscious. Like, for all I know, from my perceptions, I'm conscious, but I don't know for sure that you're conscious. Like, for all I know, you could just be. I mean, I don't know. I trust that you are, and as because we're animals and we came from the same place, we have the same understanding of things. Like, we obviously trust that each other are, and all people, experience things in the same way because we act like it, and obviously we can communicate about it. But yeah, you don't. Like, I can't prove that you're conscious. I can't prove that I'm conscious, but I can kind of tell. But to be fair, I mean, even that, people would argue that you can't prove that you're conscious. You can't. Yeah, people would argue that. I've had this conversation with someone before, and it gets sticky when you get down to like the very definition of what things mean, because I think like language itself is structured in a way based on our subjective reality, and when you get down to a certain level where it's almost like the language can't even adequately, because like in language there's an object and a subject type of thing, and to prove that you exist like on a fundamental level, like it gets to a point where the language, like you can't go any further down when you deny that there's such thing as like an object or a subject or whatever. But I don't fucking. That's a bit of waffle, to be honest. I'm not sure. Not sure that really leads anywhere.
No, that's interesting. Talking about language and stuff like that. Probably when we were conscious, but not at the sophistication of probably when we were conscious, but not at like the sophistication of like language and like forming language and stuff like that, like with words. I was listening to Huberman on Andrew Schultz's podcast, and Huberman was talking about this guy. I can't remember who he is, but some of the PhD guy who like believes that dance and song were the precursors to modern day language, which is quite interesting. Like, we first communicated in a playful way through dance and song, maybe to initiate like a mating game and all that sort of thing, and then language came after. So I guess you could say, like, if language came after consciousness, language would never really have the ability to define what it is or like put it into words, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe not. It's obviously, it's consciousness, I feel like obviously has to be more fundamental, particularly if you get into the language of discussing consciousness, like the consciousness. I mean, yeah, it's confusing. I'm maybe a bit underslept to be trying to piece this on together right now.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult topic to discuss. Anything else that you want to discuss in our free for all today?
No. We've went down a few rabbit holes there. I think that's good. That's good for me.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. Sorry, this was going to be a bit of a shorter episode than normal, but I guess that's just how it goes. We don't want to bore you with 2 hour long episodes every single time. I think we've only done that once or twice, but we don't want to do that too often. Make it a little bit more digestible every now and then. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else really to say. I mean, good luck to everyone's teams in the World Cup if you're in it, unlike Ireland.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck to everyone. Good luck to everyone still on No Not November.
Oh yeah, shout out! You've only got 7 and 8 days left. Yeah, I'm sure it's been a difficult task for most of you lads out there, and women, if they participate in that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what you'd call it, but
Okay, that's probably a good place to wrap it up, so to speak.
Yeah, before we cut any more shit and get in trouble. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. It is 19 minutes past 5 in the evening. Same day, same date, obviously. Maybe we'll do a 24-hour podcast soon. I don't know. Probably not, though. Thank you, people. See you next week. And see you next week, Pete, as well.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. See you in a bit.